Story number 3 is about groups hoping to add more liberal elements to the state constitution, but were turned back. Well-funded campaigns gathered enough signatures to get 2 proposed amendments on the ballot this year, abortion rights and recreational marijuana. Despite getting a majority of votes, 57% for abortion rights and nearly 56% for recreational marijuana, they both lost. That's because the state's constitution requires that a ballot amendment must get 60% support. One other reason they did not pass, Governor DeSantis spent more than $50 million in public dollars on messaging campaigns against the amendments, according to estimates from some of the governor's opponents, including millions the state won in lawsuits against the opioid industry. Tara, $50 million is a lot to spend on ads. What do you think of the precedent? This is really unusual.
Absolutely. I mean, the election in this regard was a win for the Republicans. With that kind of majority for those amendments, although that may be the soft underbelly of the Republicans, that where they're the weakest, because now Democrats have to look at those votes. Who are those 56 and 57% of the voters? They're going to have to go after those to actually rebuild the Democratic Party. But I think the real vulnerability for the governor is $50 million, and it's against state law. And so it's a precedent that is unheard of. We've talked about it before, but I certainly think that now in the future, if we ever do have a Democratic governor, he'll certainly have these same tools at his disposal. But I think what we really need to look at it in this kind of these amendments, this is the will of the people. Citizen initiatives is the one place of direct democracy. And so to see a sitting governor kind of go against that, even though his rhetoric is one thing, that's really telling. And I think his report card for litigation costs that are going to come later might really follow him into his next steps in politics.
Dan, with the governor having so much power in the state, because he's got a supermajority in the legislature, he's got control essentially of the Supreme Court. Who's going to stop him from using state tax dollars to take out ads like that?
Voters, as long as they reach the 60% threshold. Yeah. Typical lawyer getting all caught up with stuff like the law.
I know. Shame on me.
Come on, let's be realistic here. We have this 60% threshold, and when that measure passed, it didn't even pass by 60%. I mean,
it was approved by voters.
This is an effort. This has always been an effort by the Florida legislature to interfere with democracy. 50% plus 1 ought to be enough to pass. If you win an election by 50% plus, you're elected.
That's right.
And that's the way it should be in Florida. But this is an effort by the Florida legislature to inhibit citizen initiatives.
Mm-hmm. Steve, it always struck me that citizen initiatives get on the ballot because the legislature has failed to do something. Is that the way you see it?
Oh, absolutely. It's the only safety valve left. And Donald Trump likes to talk about elections being rigged. This is a rigged election in the sense of, as Dan Ruth points out, the 60% threshold, which has been around for a long time. It's been around almost 20 years in the state. They've made it harder and harder for groups to gather petitions. The stated goal is to prohibit fraud. There has been some fraud in the petition initiative business in Florida and other states. Not to the degree that Republicans claim, but it does exist. And, Ron DeSantis rigged the election by using state resources to, in effect, propagandize, especially against the abortion rights amendment. So it's becoming more and more difficult to get a ballot initiative passed, but it's the only avenue left for people who are ignored by this state and by this legislature.
And don't forget, even when these measures do pass by 60%, there's no guarantee that they'll ever be enacted into law. The restoration of felon voting rights, for example, did meet that threshold, and we still don't have any enabling legislation from Tallahassee to allow that to take place.
I do think if Democrats want a pathway forward, that all they have to do is look at this election with these amendments. $50 million to inhibit Florida voters, and they still got 57 and 56%. This is the roadmap for Democrats to go after. So, this is something that they need to evaluate. They were in urban and coastal areas where most of those folks came out, and they have to look at their messaging and see what can they do to replicate that in the rest of the state, and can they actually do that in the rural areas as well.